Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Nostalgia Trap podcast. My name is David Parsons. I'm happy to bring another episode to you today. Today's guest is Will Menaker. Will is currently working at Liveright Publishing, which is part of the Norton Publishing world, and he's responsible for putting out recently the debut novel of Jacob Bacharach, which is called The Bend of the World, which he gave me a copy of, and I'm very excited to read because it has to do with UFOs and aliens and all sorts of weird shit that I've been into since I guess I was a kid and an X-Files fan. But in either case, Will is someone who I've known since graduate school. I met him at the CUNY Graduate Center, where we always had great conversations. I remember about The Onion, about pop culture, and about American history and society and politics. He has a really cool take on all that stuff, and we had a great conversation about a wide range of things, including his radical ancestors, who are people who he tells me all about, who basically tried to create like socialist cooperative factories in the United States. And the stories he tells about them are really cool, and we try to bring it all together. He actually sent me an email that did bring it all together, and I wanted to read a part of his email that really kind of wrapped up our conversation, and I think highlighted a lot about kind of why I like Will's particular take on all the apocalyptic culture that we talk about. He says the contrast between apocalyptic and utopian fantasy closes the loop on our extremely varied conversation. I think what I admire most about my radical relatives is that, though in one sense they were a little nuts and fell short in both their personal efforts to run a factory and or create a socialist society in America, but they believed in and tried to live in a way that was different from capitalism. They didn't think that it was science fiction to run a business not based on the exploitation of labor. They uncynically imagined a world without capitalism, which we're conditioned to dismiss as a dangerous fantasy. And it may well be, but considering the currently grim and impoverished state of our imagination and planet, doesn't seem so crazy. We all know what the nightmare looks like, and we see that more and more in our entertainment, Hunger Games, Walking Dead, etc., and government. But it's not enough to just reflect our vaguely dystopian and oppressive society, because anyone can pick that up and read into what they already believe. I think we should try to swing back around and allow ourselves to enjoy the fantasy of what a country or world not so totally psychotic would look like, something after our zombie apocalypse. That's the end of Will's email. I thought that was a great way of wrapping up our conversation. I hope you enjoy this talk with Will Menaker and enjoy more episodes of the Nostalgia Trap. You can find them on iTunes. You can go to nostalgiatrap.libsyn.com for all the episodes. They are on Stitcher.com, the Stitcher Radio Network. And you can also, of course, like the Facebook page of the Nostalgia Trap and get updates on new episodes and other stuff from me. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed. This is me talking to Will Menaker.
I think the funniest thing I ever read about Oliver Stone's JFK was the one sentence review of it was Jim Garrison blows the lid off the homosexual conspiracy to assassinate the president.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, there is so much of that. Like there's so much. Just like these quick Oliver Stone montages that kind of like cut in of horror, and the horror is just men having sex with each other, like literally, and they have makeup on, and you're like, and it's what's really weird is it's Joe Pesci and Tommy Lee Jones. It's
Joe Pesci and Tommy Lee Jones with Kevin Bacon as their sort of like rent boy.
Yeah, exactly.
And the scene where they go over to Tommy Lee Jones' house for like a gay orgy, and they're doing poppers and watching the Triumph of the Will being projected on a big wall.
Yeah,
and it'd be the Oliver Stone cut, and they'd be like Joe Pesci doing a popper, and then it would cut to like German youths playing hopscotch and wrestling with each other.
Yeah, he uses the same editing techniques and sequences to show like gay sex that he uses in like Natural Born Killers to show
trippy,
mutilation,
horrifying acid trip or something.
Oh, Oliver Stone. I still haven't seen that. Have you seen any of that Untold History?
I have actually, and
it's good?
It's good. It is very good. It's definitely worth watching.
I want to see it. I wonder what I'll think of it though.
Well, I mean, It's interesting.
He seems to like overly simplify things. There's like this.
He does, obviously.
I don't know if you've seen this YouTube video of him like smoking weed with like the Wu-Tang Clan or something like that. I don't remember if it was Wu-Tang Clan. It's like a group of rappers. It's probably really racist of me to just say like the Wu-Tang Clan automatically. Any group of rappers is just Wu-Tang Clan. But he's like he's smoking pot with them, and he's kind of just talking about like how everything's about money, man. Like everything just comes down to money, man. And like he has this like he sounds like that like ignorant old hippie that like had a flash of had a flash of like consciousness about the system or whatever many decades ago, and is still like playing the same harp.
There's a little of that. Like I said, I haven't seen the entire series, but like right off the bat, it's interesting, like about World War II and whatnot. Like, where else would you see, like in any kind of American television program or historical documentary, the flat historical fact that the Soviet Union defeated Adolf Hitler and the Nazi war machine? Like that is really the point of the first one.
That's the thing that's so frustrating about him, I think, is that liking him and liking that kind of perspective. Yeah. He's like Michael Moore. He he brings the message that needs to be brought to the people at the same time. He's kind of like a grotesque figure himself.
And that's the hard thing.
Is that fair?
Yeah, no, that is fair. I mean, that's the hard thing because of someone like Michael Moore or Oliver Stone is because there's always something to be critical of. But I mean, do you think people on the right like pick apart their most successful propropagandists? Do they feel insecure about that, or do they feel
mean like about Rush Limbaugh?
Yeah, about Rush Limbaugh,
Bill O'Reilly.
Are they just like, well, he plays for our team, and I appreciate he's getting the message out there, but he's also kind of a ridiculous person and maybe not 100% sophisticated.
I think there's room for me to imagine that level of sophistication from someone on the right. I think, but at the same time, it's tricky because it's like I don't know if those are really the propagandists of the right. You know what I mean? Like it seems like there are others that are maybe more obscure, like the Koch brothers. I think you know what I mean. I think of like those guys as like the real kind of guys that are getting the message out there. I don't know. That night, when I think of Rush Limbaugh and Bill O'Reilly and all that stuff, I think of like almost like an old fashioned kind of right wingism, if that makes sense. Like I feel like Bill O'Reilly was left behind almost when like Obama got elected. Bill O'Reilly got kind of overshadowed by Glenn Beck. Did you watch that whole process? At a certain point, Bill O'Reilly was like the superstar, and Glenn Beck kind of overshadowed him at some point.
Yeah, and I think that's why he had to leave Fox. I don't think Fox or Glenn Beck, because Glenn Beck really blew up right after Obama was first elected.
Yeah,
right. And it was sort of like
he took it way further.
The right wing sort of media organism realized that like they had to adapt, like they'd been struck, and like now they need to like reform and regroup and like reform the amoeba into one that will fit into the the new paradigm or whatever. And Glenn Beck
like slough off the skin.
Yeah,
and slither into a new form. Yeah.
But I think guys like O'Reilly and Hannity are always going to have more staying power than Beck because they're Beck he's too unpredictable for like this sort of the Fox apparatus, whereas like O'Reilly and Hannity, who apparently I hear also despise one another. They really hate one another, and it's a constant pissing match between the two of them in Fox News. Like in that, I hear it was the guy Joe Muto. Remember he wrote for Gawker, the guy who was sort of outed as the Fox News mole.
Yeah.
He said that they're hugely competitive between one another, and Bill O'Reilly feels that he's always getting slighted because Roger Ailes is much closer to Hannity than he is to him. And in terms of like certain guests that won't do both shows, or you can do one show but not the other because the guy, then they'll
Is Hannity do you hate Hannity as much as I do? He seems to be like, for me, like there's something in him that almost makes my blood itch to watch. Like I can't watch clips when people like say like, oh, look at this clip of Hannity being an asshole. I can't even watch it. It's hard to. I
can't even watch it, not because I viscerally disgusts me in any way. I can't watch it just because I think he's so dumb and boring.
Yeah.
Like it just there's no like I like Glenn Beck. I think Glenn Beck is entertaining because. I have a kind of weird affection for him because he's so scattershot. He's so all over the place, and he's sort of like when you see Glenn Beck's shtick, it's sort of like you get the sense that he's constantly shaping and reshaping his own ideology to fit just something he read this morning.
Yeah. He's like the little brother that watched an Oliver Stone movie. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
like it all of a sudden got really excited about a lot of different like weird conspiracy and like constantly finding some obscure book that becomes like you're saying like exactly what he's going to talk about that day.
The Cleon Skossin book.
Yeah.
There's a lot of this sort of like mid-century Bircher paranoia and the 5,000-year leap. I think that's the Cleon Skossin book he's always going on about. And then having on that guy, David Barton, who's like the evangelical pseudo-historian.
Right.
Thing is basically making up things about the Founding Fathers or discovering new evidence of the Bible being written into the Constitution.
Oh, that's always fun stuff.
Yeah, he's like on this very like sort of Da Vinci Code of the right.
Yeah, I'm horrified by those guys, but I often wonder like how much actual kind of power they have in the culture. You know, I always think about like that the average Fox News viewer is 68 years old, so this is like really is like old people that are into this stuff.
That's true, but
they vote, right? So
yeah, as we've just seen,
Yeah.
in this I would say they have quite a bit of power in the culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I mean, I feel like I've been hearing my whole life that this Republican beast is just going to like die out because they're all just cranky old white people, and eventually there's going to be like they'll go too far, or the people just don't like them, or they're too old. But man, I don't see it happening. It's just
that like because we have such a progressive culture, we feel like, oh well, obviously we're all like everyone's pro gay now, everyone's pro pot now. The culture has moved beyond the kind of like stodgy, old fashioned 1950s shit that we associate with Bill O'Reilly, and yet like Republicans keep winning elections.
And that's what's interesting about Glenn Beck is because I can easily imagine him shifting. Like Bill O'Reilly will never be pro-gay or pro-marijuana, but I can totally imagine, like Glenn Beck has even been saying recently, like, I like gay people, or I'm not opposed to gay marriage, or like, I could even him being like, I'm a small government constitutionalist, so if like your town wants to legalize marijuana, that's fine. But if the next town over wants to execute you for it, that's also, federalism, that's also good.
It's like the confused libertarian moment that we're
exactly.
in. Yeah. So before we get too far into talking about Fox News, let me go back a little bit into your life and like how you became kind of politically aware, because I feel like, when I only know you from graduate school, I think, seeing you in around the graduate center and talking to you, I always have fun riffing on the news with you, because it feels like we're both like into The Onion and like had a similar like comedic sensibility. And I feel like the comedic sensibility is very... it's kind of a cliche, but like comics are some of the most serious people, and like the comedic sensibility of like being into The Onion, or for me, like I was like, I think for a period of years in the early 2000s, I would have said that my sensibility was like Mr. Show, like Mr. Show. If you're not into Mr. Show, you don't get me. Like it felt like a really like core part of my identity. So I want to talk to you a little bit about like how you developed that way.
Yeah, I remember someone in high school giving me a mixtape of Bill Hicks. And that was like, Bill Hicks, that was totally. Like a message from beyond. I was like, wow, how did I never know about this guy my whole life? Or George Carlin, Richard Pryor, like that kind of that dark satirical perspective on American culture is a handy one, and one that I obviously relate to as being sort of the most apparent and most comfortable tool to describe the world we're living in, or the culture at large. Yeah,
it's almost like seeing things so darkly, you have to like take the edge off of it somehow. Otherwise, it's a drag. You know what I mean? That makes sense. Like to think or talk about like the dark aspects of American culture and society. You need a little bit of humor, otherwise it's a bitter time.
It's unbearable. I mean, like, or you just become like NPR.
Right.
I could, or I could,
That's a good way of putting it.
I
so
can only
you either go The Onion way or NPR.
Yeah, or
humorless.
I mean, God bless her. I love Amy Goodman, but
sure, yeah,
she's the best. Democracy Now! Is great news program, but after a while, I feel like it is sort of parodyable.
Yeah. Well, and it's
necessary, but
it's almost like I get the same feeling when I see like a Democracy Now! Link on my like Facebook timeline. I get the same feeling as like when you're flipping through TV and you see like the African kids with flies on their face. Like you some like part of your heart dies because what it shows. That there's like a responsibility you feel in seeing that, and a guilt about flipping the channel at the same time. You know what I mean? Like there's a darkness and humorlessness to it. Americanness to it that I think is part of that, like making it hard. Not that everything has to be funny. But going back to like when you were a kid, were you how much did politics and like the Americanness and the American experience of being here during the growing up in the 80s and 90s, how much of that did that enter into your consciousness when you were young?
Well, I was born in 1983, and I've lived my entire life in New York City, and I grew up on the Upper West Side, so that's about as cloistered a political and cultural upbringing as you can possibly have. I don't remember, I grew up in a very liberal cultural milieu, affluent Upper West Side liberals, it very much true to the stereotype.
Like Seinfeld lived next door.
Yeah,
kind of
Seinfeld, Woody Allen.
Yeah,
right. It's not far off from the truth. Actually, George Costanza actually did literally live next to my apartment.
Right.
in the sort of interstitial material with the slap bass.
My
apartment was in that shot.
Are you serious?
In the years when he was living
with... the establishing shot?
Yeah. In the years when he was living with his ill-fated fiancée, the one who dies from licking envelopes.
Yeah, right.
That was the building next door to mine. You could see my apartment building in that second unit stuff.
So for me, like the Upper West Side is a place that I would never be able to afford to live, but I love walking around it and like imagining that. And I've spent a lot of time up there for a lot of different reasons. It's kind of like my favorite neighborhood of Manhattan. How much were you aware when you were young that you lived in this kind of like very specific place? Because it's like a very specific place.
I was very aware of it because I had two parents, both in media. My dad was an editor at the New Yorker for many, many years. My mom worked at the New York Times, all over the magazine, the book review, the Science Times. So it was a very literate.
You really are a character from a Woody Allen movie.
Yeah. It's dissent and commentary formed to make me dysentery. But I was very aware of this sort of specific cultural context in which I grew up, being sort of proud of it, or maybe even a bit snobbish about it.
Yeah, sure.
Obviously.
I've always noticed that about you. It just oozes off of you.
Yeah, my sense of entitlement and looking down on these rubes from everywhere else. That's how I feel. That's how I was raised.
Did you ride the subway when you were a kid?
I rode the bus a lot when I was a kid because I went to school on the Upper West Side at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine on 110th in Amsterdam, which once again is right around the corner from Tom's Diner.
Yes, Seinfeld.
And Columbia.
That's the territory.
And Columbia. I took the bus to school, and then when I was in high school, which was downtown, I took the subway.
Yeah.
So growing up in New York City, public transport, absolutely, it was an everyday part of my life.
So, you've watched the city change, as much as anybody.
The Upper West Side in particular, I feel like I go back there now, and I don't even recognize what Broadway looks like. It's just everything.
What's changed about the Upper West Side?
Well, everything is like a bank.
Yeah.
I walk down, it's like an open-air mall. It's the only people who can afford the rents are just massive banks, and you walk down the street and it's just like the storefronts are just these open spaces of like 20 ATMs and nobody's in there.
What was it when you were a kid? How was that?
It was
different?
much smaller bookstores, delis, smaller Judaica stores. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think the original one is still there, but it was much more of a neighborhood feel to it.
Yeah.
It was the same things you'd find everywhere else in the city, but the weird and disconcerting thing now is that just so much of this commercial and open space just looks like anything you would find anywhere else in the country.
Yeah. And when you're growing up riding the subway, did you go down to the Village? Were you were you a club kid? Were you a B-boy? I
was definitely...
Which 1980s kid were you, or which 80s, 90s kid were you?
90s kid, yeah, no.
80s would have been too young, right?
Way too young in the 80s.
I think of the 80s as I was born a little bit before you, but the 80s are still pretty blurry to me. I was still watching cartoons, I think, mainly.
Yeah. Here's the thing.
And by that I mean the Smurfs.
To sort of situate, I remember nothing of Ronald Reagan.
Really?
I have no memories of Ronald Reagan whatsoever, but I have very specific memories of George H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
So I guess I remember the first Gulf War vividly,
mm-hmm.
and I remember the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill controversy.
The pubic hair on the coke
controversy. Not that specifically. My parents.
I remember that specifically.
They didn't explain that to me. But I absorbed that there was a controversy about this, and I remember watching on TV the actual yay or nay vote. I remember my dad just being so crestfallen with every yay vote that came in. But I must have been in first or second grade at the time. And in my brain at that time, absorbed this whole thing as just essentially a boys versus girls dispute.
Yeah, right.
And I thought, well, girls are stupid. I don't like them.
Wow.
Obviously, my 6 to 7 year old self,
of course, that's how you feel.
Totally
about
happy to have Clarence Thomas be put on the Supreme Court.
Wow, if only you'd known.
If only I had known. Yeah. And then the Gulf War.
It's hard I think it'd be hard for a 6 or 7 year old to comprehend like all the implications of the Anita Hill case. I mean, it's still a complicated case. You know what I mean? Like it's still something that there was just a movie last year called Anita that was like her whole story. And I guess it's like much more complex than anyone really knows.
Do you remember the thing recently about how Jeannie Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife, called Anita Hill and left a message on her voicemail that was really weird.
And she's a psycho.
She's a nut.
In her own way.
Yeah. She's an absolute nut and runs this sort of like ultra right, sort of like ultra elite think tank or sort of journalist kind of thing where right wing media figures and political operatives and lobbyists sort of collude. It's about ethics in right wing journalism, basically.
Yeah, right. Just like.
Yeah, no, but she called Anita Hill and left, like, literally drunk dialed her and left this bizarre message where she was like, I'm just reaching out to you over the airwaves, and I just had a thought that maybe some time has passed and you would apologize or something like that.
Wow.
So, look it up. She said, I'm reaching out to you.
I remember something vague about that. That's insane, though. Yeah. Clarence Thomas is the gift that keeps on giving, right?
And will continue to give probably for another 50 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you said the Gulf War was when you kind of came online a little bit. I feel like that was true of me, too.
I totally remember the Gulf War. And I remember marching down West End Avenue with my parents to a church on 86th and West End Avenue to protest the Gulf War. And again, I was very young, so I didn't totally. I mean, I remember it vividly. But
your parents were like
my parents,
anti-war.
They were against the war. But again, in my I think, first or second grade brain, I remember being secretly thrilled by the whole thing. Yeah. I remember thinking it was all quite cool.
I drew pictures of like Patriot missiles and Scud missiles stuff like that. It was pornography to me.
Yeah, and all that great night vision footage and
isn't it kind of fucked up to think about now, like knowing that like CNN was like, so instrumental in like selling this war to Americans, to like think that as like 6-year-olds
and it totally
9-year-olds or however old we were. I mean, we were too young to really form critical thoughts about it. And it really I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was my first experience with war, and it felt like this is great. I mean, Whitney Houston singing at the national anthem of the Super Bowl was like they were communicating how awesome this was to us.
And I think also it was as a young kid, I was fascinated by construction equipment, like backhoes and cranes and things like that. And a tank is just really a cooler version of that. And these really big, awesome machines and vehicles.
They fetishized the shit out of that stuff on CNN too. Like it was just kind of like loving camera shots of like that. It was almost like watching a car show. You know what I mean? Like look at this stuff. It's almost designed for children.
And the other thing that was weird looking back on it now is that it lasted like 2 weeks.
Yeah,
it was over, and basically, I would maintain that the first Gulf War was, since World War II, basically the only unambiguous military victory that this country's had.
Yeah, well, and it wasn't even a war, really. I mean, Baudrillard has like a whole point about how the Gulf War never even happened. It was just kind of like it was a series of shots edited together, or a series of skirmishes like that.
Well,
that
I'm sure it was real enough for people in Iraq and Kuwait.
No, that's the danger of the academic theory head, in a sense. The kind of like the ability to say things like that.
But there was a real, Saddam invaded Kuwait, and then we went there and kicked him out and rolled it back. And it was actually Dick Cheney who said at the time that it would be crazy to go all the way to Baghdad because then we'd have to take over the whole country.
And didn't George
H.W.
be there
Bush
for another
agree
60
with
years? That, basically?
Yeah, him and Colin Powell and Dick Cheney were all on the same page at the time. They knew exactly that.
But look how wrong they were, because we took over Iraq and everything's fine now.
I know.
Yeah.
I don't know what Dick Cheney was thinking.
He should be embarrassed. Yeah, so, all right, so you have the Gulf War, and, like, George H.W. Bush throwing up on the Japanese prime minister, which I remember very clearly.
I remember that as well. Everyone was... I remember George H.W. Bush being kind of a joke.
Yeah.
He was sort of a punchline.
Yeah, well, Dana Carvey made sure of that on Saturday Night Live. I mean, how much did you watch Saturday Night Live when you were a kid?
No, I didn't.
No? Did you ever watch that show?
Yeah, I did, but later,
more
more in the Will Ferrell years. I would watch
Okay.
I would watch all the reruns on Comedy Central.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't staying up to watch like Dana Carvey do
Wayne's World.
Yeah, Wayne's World. I sort of got into that. Yeah, I came to that later in syndication.
So, I mean, if you did, as you came of age in the 90s, what was the culture that you fell into, if any? Were you like really nerdy in high school? Or did you play football? What
No, I definitely wasn't
what
a jock.
stereotype did you inhabit? If at all. If you're not a unique human being.
I definitely sort of semi dorky leanings in terms of being very into comic books and science fiction.
Yeah.
I found like that was that genre, found a way that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this, that sci-fi and fantasy, like I think naturally the people who are fall a little bit outside the mainstream or aren't a little bit dorky, it always appeals to them because they're both essentially about visions of a society other than our own.
Yeah, right.
Something
right.
different than the dominant culture and hierarchy that exists now. But I think there's sort of a crudely like a right-left dichotomy in that, like in sort of right and left-wing nerds, in that the heroic fantasy genre is more reactionary because it's about the past and it's about glorious kings and feudalism and swords.
Right.
And science fiction has always been more progressive because it's about the future.
Yeah, and whether it's about a utopia or a dystopia, it's always kind of like commenting on the present.
It's about taking a piece of technology or an aspect of society in the present day and projecting it into the future for better or worse.
I mean, it's weird because, at the time that you were into that stuff, it was still very much, an outcast culture. But now it seems like Comic-Con is like exploded, and like, sci-fi and geek culture has become like a dominant kind of meme in the culture. It's kind of weird to watch.
I was at Comic-Con this summer in San Diego.
What was that like?
It was insane.
It
was ridiculous. I went there.
It's not what it used to be. You know what I mean? Like growing up, like the comic book guy on The Simpsons was like, that was how the culture saw comic book people. You know what I mean?
Believe me, and the comic store on the Upper West Side, which is no longer there, Big Apple Comics, but I remember going there, and you'd walk up a staircase, and it was on the second floor of a building, and it was like comic book guy. Like the people who worked there were, like sort of ratty beards and ponytails, just like talking to each other, but it was great.
Fat, bearded, bitter virgin kind of image.
Oh, no, I'm sure it's not that bad. But it was great though. I loved it,
No, it's just weird because it's like this flat, at the same time that it's great to see sci-fi like kind of take over the culture, there's this kind of like loss of that kind of niche feeling of it. You know what I mean? It was like something that they can't, like sci-fi people can't necessarily claim to be the outsiders as much anymore.
No, not at all.
I mean, all that, I think pretty much the only movie they make anymore is something related to the Avengers universe. They just announced 17 more movies.
I'm really looking forward to after the next economic collapse, when like this current bubble explodes and impoverishes. I like our economy. I want to make the transition into a solely Marvel Comics based film economy.
Right. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. He deserves it in some respect. Like he had a hard life. He went through drug addiction. He can be like the guy that just is in every single movie for the rest of the time.
Yeah, he's kind of an asshole though, because I know he has said that we should be harder and incarcerate more people on drugs.
Yeah, didn't he be like
he made a lot of like tough on crime statements where
he emerged from prison like the opposite of the girl from Orange is the New Black. He like came out and like he was like even more hardened about like punishment for drug use.
I mean, maybe that's what got him off it though.
Yeah,
so,
that's what he claims.
Yeah. I mean, I guess he'd know more about prison and drug addiction than I would. So, but he seems like kind of an asshole to me.
Yeah, So it's weird seeing like that stuff, like comic book stuff, kind of become so dominant. But at the same time, it's like it makes sense, and we're in a way like it means that the culture's gotten like a little savvier in some respects. You know what I mean? Like it feels like it's not so much just like beach bums and ski patrol movies. You know what I mean? Like there are movies that Hollywood is supporting that are a little smarter, but at the same time, it's not exactly the 1970s. You know, there's no like the conversation is not being made and supported in the same way.
Well, I mean, what do you make of the fact that whether it's horror or sci-fi, like I just feel like everything is a post-apocalyptic narrative now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, doesn't that say something a little bit about like what the culture feels like about where we're at?
Yeah, it definitely does. And they were very big in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
Like you had
Earthquake. And all that kind of
well,
stuff.
those are like disaster movies. I mean, more like the post-apocalyptic movies.
Okay.
Like starting with the George Romero zombie movies. That was 1968. Was Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
And that was like a movie absolutely for its time about the social and racial disintegration of America. That was like the total inverse of the America. That movie was the pure American nightmare.
Yeah.
And
it has something to do with like the masses of poor people. You know what I mean? Like
and then Romero, the hero of Night of the Living Dead, is a black guy.
Yeah.
And it's never commented on. It's just there and it's apparent, and he's the only one that's like level-headed and heroic throughout it. And they're like, in the house they go to, there's a family that's in the basement that's hiding out there that they discover like about halfway through the movie, and it's just all about like how father knows least. Like it's the dad and his daughter and wife, and he's just like a completely hysterical, ineffectual idiot.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of 70s movies had that kind of reversal, especially of the typical like American masculine role. You know, I always show my students like Midnight Cowboy because it's like they're commenting on exactly that the whole time. That like commenting on that like Ratso Rizzo says like John Wayne was a faggot, you know, and like there's kind of like there's explicit talk about that image of manhood completely falling apart during that era.
Yeah, and in Night of the Living Dead, it's the classic. You know, it set the mold for like the house under siege.
Yeah,
it's the survivors in the house, you know, and then there are the bodies outside that are trying to get in. And I think
it's
like
it's
about like it's like the image of it's about like another Dustin Hoffman movie. It's like the image of the home as the battleground,
right?
And like I said, in the inversion of all of these. Hierarchies is what Romero was showing.
It also kind of plays into that right-wing fantasy of like the masses are coming, we have to have guns, and like you know that seems to be a trope in American life forever in some respects.
And it's weird because I think now the zombie genre and trope I think is very right-wing. Like if you watch The Walking Dead, which is like the #1 show on cable right now, and of course I do.
Yeah.
I think that's a very right-wing show.
How so?
I think it's incredibly right-wing because I think it's just all about it's the opposite of what Romero is doing. It's the resurrection of the white male authority figure and with the gun in the holster to protect his family and home from just the hordes of just faceless, nameless people out to get you. And it's all about him sort of the Rick character sort of reclaiming this patriarchal role and being kind of like this, and living every day as kind of as sort of like a military engagement with the outside world, and just having to constantly struggle. It's the sort of it's making entertainment out of the idea that like the good life is one of constant violent struggle against people who are out to kill you at every turn.
Well, I heard Zizek, recently, someone probably posted a quote of it on Facebook or something, like him talking about like zombies and like zombies as like our primary metaphor for poor people, and like that, and that vampires are our primary metaphor for rich people because they're like there's only a few of them. It's kind of an elite society,
and they're parasitic.
Yeah, they live forever, but we kind of want to be them. There's something like no one wants to be a zombie. Like everyone wants to be a vampire.
Vampires are very stylish. They're rich.
Yeah. And they're romantic. You know what I mean? Like I haven't watched Twilight, but I assume it's some sort of like teen romance element to the whole narrative.
Yeah.
And there's werewolves in Twilight. I haven't figured out what they represent.
I don't know what werewolves represent either. But
maybe
going back to
Night
of the Living Dead, at least to contrast it with The Walking Dead.
Yeah, definitely.
The end of that movie, features the hero. He's the only survivor. He lives through the night. Everybody else is killed by the zombies. He survives, and it's sort of like as the dawn breaks, he's in the house and is shot dead by like a posse of like the sort of like sheriffs and deputies and just sort of like deputized vigilantes, basically, who are just roaming the countryside, just killing people. And like just sort of like he doesn't know if he's a zombie or not. They just shoot him.
Right.
And the credits roll, and there's sort of these still photo sequence of them dragging his body out of the house with like meat hooks and just throwing it on a big bonfire.
I remember this now. I haven't seen this in so long.
It's this horrific image of just like, it's the nightmare view of, I think, everything The Walking Dead celebrates, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me. I don't know. Like the culture today is there's a lot to unpack, and there's a lot. I feel like a lot lost in from the '70s in terms of the '70s are always the decade we look back to for some reason, and I know like overly romanticized that they were making like challenging works back then. But like when I think about this, the '70s and the kind of films you bring up, I think about how. I don't know. It would be awesome to watch movies that were that conflicted now and that popular at the same time. You know what I mean? How did you learn to read culture like that? Were you someone that like was watching a lot of movies and talking about movies when you were a teenager? Were movies,
absolutely.
Were movies a part of your like? Did your parents watch more sophisticated movies?
Oh, definitely. Like movies are a huge part of my upbringing, and I would say like political evolution as well. I mean, because movies and television is where we find the ideology of capitalism today.
Thank you. An appearance from
and so on
Koki Zizek.
But again, not to go for the easy joke, but I think that definitely is true, and I think because they're entertainment and so often not like, I don't think the writers of The Walking Dead set out to make
a right-wing show.
I wouldn't be.
And that's what makes it so much more important that they made
it wouldn't
one.
be successful if it was.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be so popular. But I think the narratives that become that resonate at any given time, I think, tell us a lot about people's ideology or how people see themselves.
No, I agree.
As part of American society,
and subconsciously,
and subconsciously. And I think what we see with The Walking Dead is a kind of a real sort of resurrection of this feeling of just intense tribalism.
Yeah.
In that we can really only depend on ourselves and our kin, and that everyone else is the enemy, and this kind of back to blood idea as we get, less and less, as we have less and less money, less and less power.
Well, as the world divides more clearly into just vampires and zombies.
Yeah,
you know what
absolutely.
I mean? Like more and more people are going to want to act like vampires because the vampires, they have nice houses and nice clothes, and they get to suck blood and live forever. You don't want to be a zombie with all the masses, and I think that dichotomy really like is in people's minds and is expressed by these shows very, very starkly. I mean, I agree. I think that The Walking Dead is about immigration as much as about zombies. You know what I mean? Like it kind of like gives people a way to think about issues like that and demonstrates that we're a terrified country. Like this Ebola and ISIS shit is fucking unbelievable.
I mean, we are again. I mean, this is what's weird now because I don't remember ever being like the culture being this psychotic when I was growing up. I mean, maybe I just didn't realize it. But I don't think that's true. Like, I don't think that. I really think
we freaked out during 9/11, and like maybe that's like when things just began to accelerate into like hyper fear because like 9/11, it was like I don't know if you remember the 90s. It was not a good time. Like we were thinking about like the 90s were the time when like Oklahoma City happened and like the Unabomber.
Oh yeah,
and,
I remember that.
Columbine and nothing but like ugliness about the government. About it's almost like the turn. An acceleration of that Walking Dead feeling,
See, I remember the first World Trade Center bombing.
Yeah.
I remember when that happened, but I remember it was just like sort of a blip, like nobody really cared. I mean, maybe it was because it was unsuccessful.
It certainly did. I mean, it didn't produce the intense Islamophobia that we have. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and it's not like there was any shortage of people to cast in that part, at least related to that terrorist attack. But yeah, I remember just people just sort of going on with their lives.
Yeah.
Like it was just a sense that like, bad things happen. But I mean, I don't know, like I view the 90s as kind of like a very, I just feel like sort of utopian decade. I mean, yeah, all this bad shit was happening, but like I said, maybe it was just this sort of like liberal bubble that I lived in, but just sort of this feeling that, well, generally everything is okay, and hey, like, hey, Bill Clinton's a good guy, like,
no, I remember that feeling too. I don't know. Do you ever think that, like, if you were the age you are now during the Clinton years, that you would have felt differently? That you would
probably,
yeah.
I mean, if I was smart, I would have, and realized what mediocre right-wing person the Clinton regime really was.
They were more prosperous years, though. I do remember like feeling that like it was easy to get a job, and I mean, when I say easy, it's like there was a feeling that, like, and maybe it was an illusion, but I think it was more true then than it is now, that like if you had a bachelor's degree, you could get a pretty good job. There was that feeling that existed, and as soon as I graduated from college was the first like big crash, and like the way down from that. And
I mean, it was all based on an illusion, but there was much less of this feeling that like it was just the natural course of things, that you must accept a diminished quality of life, and just like
right.
But see, I remember. Like I said, we talked about the Gulf War and the Clarence Thomas. Like, I remember those things, but not in any kind of political context.
Yeah.
Like I said, if you have the mind of a 7 or 8 year old, it's easy to see,
definitely.
the right wing appeal of Clarence Thomas and the fun of war. But
tells you a lot about the right wing. Kind of like childish mind state,
Well, it's probably too simple, but that's
I like things that go boom.
Yeah. But I think I sort of like. The moment that I sort of became politically like, who are these right wing people? Because like I said, like I grew up in a totally cloistered liberal environment.
Yeah.
And my grandparents on my mother's side of the family were Republicans, but and they were nice people.
Maybe this is a good time to get in that there is radicalism in your family. There's
absolutely.
In your DNA. Like your parents were liberals, it sounds like.
Yeah, my parents were very standard New York liberals.
New Yorker and New York Times.
New Yorker and New York Times working and reading
Democrat voters.
Democrat voting, liberal Democrats.
Yeah. John Kerry's.
Yeah, well, I don't want to be too insulting to my parents here. I love my mom and dad.
I respect John Kerry.
Okay,
I didn't bring up John Kerry to be insulting at all.
But
I just mean a certain kind of liberal.
And this is sort of a thing that I've come to later in life, and sort of identifying with an older family tradition, particularly on my father's side of the family, of pre-1960s, like early 20th century American communism and radicalism.
Right.
My great grandfather, as these stories usually begin in the old country, my great grandfather, Solomon, and his wife, actually, I think they may have met in New York or met in America, but they were both Orthodox Jewish families in what was then Russia.
Okay.
But at the time, Russia was a hotbed of a lot of utopian, socialist, and communist movements, and a lot of radical thinking, and both of them sort of overthrew their religious upbringing to become completely secular radicals. However, Solomon immigrated to America basically as a draft dodger to avoid conscription in the Tsar's army, which was, if you were Jewish, basically a death sentence.
Wow.
It was, it was a sort of a tacit way of cleansing Russia and its satellites of Jews, basically.
And it was known by
well
the
known,
population.
well known.
Yeah, understood.
He came to America, first to New York, and then he moved to Arkansas with dreams of starting a kind of utopian socialist farming community.
Really?
That did not work.
Okay.
Did not work. But he came back.
I figured if it did work, we would be there right now. Yeah.
He came back to New York, and again, a radical guy. He was a communist, but also sort of very energetic and enterprising. In Weehawken, or in northern New Jersey, he started a successful textile factory that was run on profit sharing and socialist ideas. Like, cool. I mean, he wasn't, he was not impoverished himself, but certainly well short of a capitalist.
Yeah, yeah.
And like tried to live out all of these ideas by like eating lunch with his workers and then bringing in sort of these having readings and musical performances or sort of this like,
it was like
cultural education of
conscious capitalism in a sense, or even like,
well, he didn't even, I mean, obviously he didn't think of himself as a capitalist at all.
Yeah.
He thought he was, he was engaging in business or, producing goods through a communist ideology. Like I said, profit sharing, and also very conscious of sort of uplifting the worker culturally.
More Park Slope Food Co-op than Whole Foods Market.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But here's the thing. He also had again, I'm not quite clear on the story here, but there was a partner in this business, or a part owner of the factory. I don't know if they founded it together or he later took on this partner.
Right.
But as is the story of so much in this country, and certainly at the time, this was about the 20s or 30s, there was sort of a reactionary capitalist counter-revolution within this factory in which his partner did not like the profit sharing and all of these sort of worker-friendly initiatives. Yeah. And they had a bitter falling out, and he ended up leaving this business, the capitalists won.
Wow.
Obviously.
Wow.
And then they moved to...
What a bitter lesson.
Bovina, New York.
Uh-huh.
Bovina, it's literally a cow town. It was a town of dairy farmers.
When you said Bovina, in my head was like Gary Larson, Far Side cow, standing upright, like Mistress Bovina.
Yeah, exactly. And then once again, wanted to have sort of a utopian farmers collective, run on socialist principles, and he tried to organize all of the local farmers to sort of share their resources, to have a sort of cooperative, so that they couldn't be exploited by.
This is your grandfather on your father's side?
This is my great-grandfather on my father's
side.
Okay. Yeah. So that they wouldn't be exploited by big agriculture.
So this is happening in what, the 20s?
This is the 20s.
Yeah.
This is the 20s and 30s, basically.
So this is Nucky Thompson territory.
Yeah, this is definitely Nucky Thompson era. And yeah, he was in New Jersey. But yeah, and again, not successful in organizing the dairy farmers in Bovina, New York, who just had no idea what he was talking about. I mean, I imagine them looking at him just like, what the fuck? Like,
yeah.
He's this fiery guy talking in a Russian accent.
Unfortunately, I think that's how a lot of people perceive socialists and communists today.
He was a fiery, Jew from Eastern Europe.
Yeah. Socialism and communism is almost occupy the same territory as like Scientology to people in America, in a sense. Most people have a resistance to even engaging in a conversation.
Yeah, they had no idea what he was talking about. Yeah. They wanted nothing to do with it. But yeah, and then sort of the next generation, my grandfather on my father's side and his brothers, they were actually all named after famous communists and radicals. Like my grandfather is Robert Owen Menaker.
Wow.
And then there was my great uncle Ainge, of course, is named after Engels. And
wow.
Then there was Nicholas. I have it here. There was Peter, named after Peter Lavrov, and Nicholas Chernyshevsky Menaker. It was another communist philosopher, and who also made the real Nicholas Chernyshevsky makes a cameo in Stoppard's Coast of Utopia.
Wow.
So yeah,
did you know about this heritage when you were young? I mean,
no,
I didn't. I didn't.
Like, and I sort of learned about it later because, unfortunately, my grandfather on that side of the family and my great uncle Ainge both died when I was very young. So I have very few actual memories of them. They died when I was probably around 3.
Yeah. My
great uncle Ainge before that. But I grew up, my parents had this house in Western Massachusetts, which was connected to like the second generation. Two of what would have been my great uncles founded a summer camp on Lake Buell in Western Massachusetts. Now, and again, this is later, I think like 30s, 40s, but in the Hudson Valley in New York and Western Massachusetts, there was very similar. There was this sort of diaspora of American Reds, many of them from Russia and Eastern European Jews, radicals, communists who settled all up and down there, and they all sort of founded these camps, basically.
Yeah.
They were summer camps, and I grew up going to this house that was left over. They had this house that my dad inherited, and it was sort of like a summer house, I guess. And I'm spending summers there, going there on the weekends.
And it was no longer a communist indoctrination camp.
No, it was no longer a communist indoctrination camp, but but it was all just sort of there. So
Yeah.
I feel like sort of haunted by it. Haunted in a positive sense, that I guess maybe I just sort of absorbed this tradition through osmosis.
Yeah, that word haunted, Josh Brown on the podcast a few episodes back, he used that word haunted to describe like the American radical experience, is that we're all kind of haunted by that past. When I think about the Hudson Valley, I think about during that era, the 30s and 40s, that's like prime like CCC, WPA, New Deal stuff at the same time. And I think that it makes me wonder if there was any like confluence between what your grandfather was or great grandfather was and family members were setting up in the Hudson Valley and those like government projects, because there was a lot of like interaction between Reds and like government projects during that era.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know specifically, how much what their experience was like with the New Deal, or how they thought, or I'm probably sure they thought Roosevelt was a reactionary, very reactionary figure, because like they were straight up communists.
Yes.
Like to be a liberal was to be on the right.
Right. Oh, totally. And the more you look at the New Deal, the more you realize that like how like it's almost. I mean, it makes Obamacare look very understandable, because the main pain they took in the New Deal was to make sure that like the market principles were in place in every single program they put together. Yeah.
Now, sort of for the second generation, right? Like my grandfather and his brothers who founded these day camps, it was sort of again, you'd say like a communist day camp, and again, I go back to Glenn Beck. I only can imagine what he would think that was like. But it was literally just a summer camp. Canoeing, archery, cabins in the woods.
They had to talk politics at some point, though.
Well, right? there was a boys' camp, and then later a guest camp for the parents. Again, who were all sort of from they came out of a kind of socialist, radical background, and they sort of had a lot of very similar background, and they all sort of settled up there, and their kids went to the camp, and it was not, according to my dad, it was not specific. It was very vaporous in its ideology of sort of the lived socialist experience. It was political in sort of like that they sung a lot of folk music, and it was connected to the Greenwich Village folk music scene. And square dancing and these kind of like corny
Americana, almost like it reminds me of like, I don't know, the Grange, or like some like old populist, you know what I mean, like farm culture.
Yeah, exactly. But it wasn't like that they were, like the Cultural Revolution drilling kids and like,
that's what I wondered.
Rifle exercises. And no, it was, in a way, it was sort of, it sounds on the surface very radical, but in a way, I think it was a process of, from one generation to the next, kind of assimilating into the American mainstream, really. And becoming more American, more liberal, basically. So like I said, I don't have any memories of these people, but I kind of feel like I'm still very much, shaped by them. And as I get older, and like just sort of like the more to the left I drift, I feel like the older I get, the more Stalinist I feel. I feel like, a connection to this tradition in my family. Very, very strongly.
That house is up there in Massachusetts.
The house is still there.
You can repurpose it, and we can get the organic farm going.
Yeah, fat chance.
And do like left-wing calisthenics and things like that. I don't know. The only summer camp I have any experience with is like some sort of like Christian summer camp that I was.
You went to a Christian summer camp?
Yeah, when I was I was like 14 or 15, and it was part of like this thing called Young Life. I don't know if you heard this organization, Young Life, but they're like an organization that like tries to present. I looked them up on Wikipedia like recently to try to unpack the things that happened to me when I was a kid. But like Young Life is like a Christian organization that tries to like take high school kids on like after school adventures and stuff like that. It's very light on the like indoctrination. They basically just like, let's have fun together, and then we'll tell you about Jesus like in the 5 minutes before everyone has to go. And that the camp that we were sent to, it was just like that, only like larger. It was like whole 2 weeks of like just fun. We rode dune buggies. We did like a zip line. We played in the lake.
That sounds like the birthright thing for Jewish kids. They take a bunch of Jewish teenagers to Israel. And they just, they get you drunk. I mean, they just let you party, and they want you to hook up, and like,
it seemed like that, yeah. And we were like, doing that in the day, and then at night they would sit us down and okay, but seriously, folks, it's all about this, and we would talk about Jesus and stuff like that. And
was there a lot of guitars and
singing and dancing, and a lot of, it was really white, like a really, really white experience. This was like the suburbs of California.
Of course, back to The Onion, I immediately think of the article, man with a beard and a sweater has a guitar and a story to tell about a man named Jesus.
Yeah, that's very, very close. The memory that I have of it that was so fucked up is I went because I wanted the canoeing and the dune buggies. I was very, very resistant to the message of Jesus. My parents were not religious people, and my dad warned me very carefully before I went to summer camp. He was like, "You're going to this thing, but you don't have to buy into anything they're telling you." So I remembered that. And when I was there, they did on the last night, they said, "Okay, everybody stand up. And we want everyone who's ready to swear their lives to Jesus Christ to sit down now." And the whole room sat down, and I didn't. And I was left. I was left like the only kid standing. And I swear, this is what's fucked up about it, because I was like 14, a very young 14. I was almost peeing my pants with fear.
That's like the hardest thing to do in the world is go against group pressure in any kind of setting like that.
Yeah. And then they pulled me aside and I said like I was a special case and it had to be worked on extra special, and they prayed with me, and I remember being very uncomfortable with the whole thing, and then them telling me that it was too late. I had already invited Jesus into my heart through the prayer.
You said the words,
and that was that. Yeah. So that you talk about moments that solidify your kind of attitudes. I definitely felt like that was my week. That was those were my weeks with Christ, and that's as far as the two of us went together. I don't know how we got started talking about that
summer
story,
camp. It was about summer camp.
Yeah, summer camp and indoctrination.
It was summer camp about how to be indoctrinated in between canoeing and archery.
Yeah, and then I got bitter about Jesus camp. I could have gone to much worse Jesus camps, I think.
There are a lot worse than that.
Holy shit, this is a religious country. It's hard to wrap your mind around that.
Again, this is sort of part of my sort of cloistered upbringing. I did go to an Episcopalian school for 9 years of my life, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine,
But it sounds like you have a Jewish background in your ancestry too.
Yeah, but they were all totally secular. That's the thing. My dad's father was, I guess, technically Jewish, but he wasn't his mother was a WASP, and they celebrated Christmas. They were raised basically as secular Christians. Obviously he kind of identifies the Jewish tradition, but they never he was never bar mitzvahed or anything.
Right.
The Jewish tradition is less, because they all renounced religion basically.
Yeah.
My great great
to be a communist.
Yeah, my great grandparents Solomon and I forgot my great grandmother's name. God bless her. But they were never married. Specifically, they chose never to get married because they didn't believe in it as a bourgeois institution. They thought it was an oppressive bourgeois convention.
That's great.
And they never did it. And actually, just back to my grandfather, in preparing for this, I actually found out that if you go to the Wikipedia page for Americans listed in the Venona papers, my grandfather is in there.
That's proud ancestry, man.
Robert Owen Menaker, and he was interviewed by the FBI as well.
I bet he was.
Here's another connection to the day camp. The guy who interviewed him was someone who was a counselor at the day camp, who was sort of slightly outside. He was a guy named Tom McDade.
Was he a mole?
Irish Catholic? No, he wasn't a mole. He became a lawyer and then later joined the FBI.
Wow!
But was very friendly and sympathetic to my family, and he interviewed my grandfather, and I think maybe protected him to a certain degree. From the full wrath of J. Edgar Hoover, which, as we now know, as a funny aside, I'm sort of halfway through reading James Ellroy's Underworld USA trilogy right now. Yeah. And I think one thing that book really gets, all the books get really well because Ellroy himself is such a cranky reactionary, is...
Maybe he's a cranky reactionary,
he is.
Or maybe he's playing that role in public.
Well, he certainly plays it up. But in his depiction of J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI... is that what he gets so well is that they were specifically engaged in a war on the left in this country.
Yeah, yeah.
And that organized crime and the sort of racketeering, and we think of Capone and, Dillinger and the Tommy guns and all that stuff, was really ancillary at best to what they viewed their real role as, which was policing political dissent within America.
Yeah.
Which the mafia certainly posed no threat. I mean, they were for business just like everyone else. They hated communists. They
right.
hated, anything that was bad for business. And
it's like they're capitalists who kill. It's like they're just like us.
And they were happy to make peace with them strategically all throughout the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s.
That's why we love gangsters. That's why we love, like, the Sopranos are like people that, that those characters are characters we love because they're like honest capitalists almost. You know what I mean? Like, we hate the like banker that uses the system that way to and like pretends like he's a good person. But like the gangster, actually just the killing and the kind of murderous, capitalism is right on the surface
because they're blue collar guys, right? As Karen Hill says in Goodfellas, our husbands are blue collar guys, and they were willing to go the extra mile.
Blue collar guys,
they were willing to go the extra mile and bring home a little bit extra.
Right.
Give her that fat wad of cash to go shopping with, or Tony Soprano.
But they have such contempt for blue collar guys.
Oh, they hate them. Like again, back to Goodfellas, he said people who took the subway to work were fucking dead. We hated them. They were chumps. But
if we wanted something, we took it, and like that is so. Like that, the thing is, that attitude is so appealing to Americans. That idea that like if we wanted something, we fucking took it, and like even the blue collar American likes to believe that that's the life he's living. It's really, it's like such a paradox because
I think people hate do-gooders.
Yeah,
and I think not wrongly so. I think people kind of, especially do-gooders from a affluent or wealthy background, and I think like I just think this The Sopranos. Just I rewatched the whole thing recently, and God, it holds up so well. I just view that show as like just the absolutely perfect portrait of like 21st, like sort of the Bush era, late 90s, early 21st century, like Bush years, like
the sort of best.
The suburban, like the Tony Soprano is just like the ultimate.
There are so many
family.
endings of they did so the endings were so great on those episodes, and like they did so many endings that just like absolute were gut punches of like both like just aesthetic grandeur, but also just like thematic depth that just absolutely fucking nailed you. I love that stuff.
I love one of the little detail. I remember
I'll never stop watching The Sopranos.
In one episode, Carmela is lying in bed reading Fred Barnes' book called Rebel in Chief about George W. Bush. And I swear to God, I remember there's a YouTube clip if you search for it online, and it's like it tells about how people still view Tony Soprano as like a hero. I mean, like to me, it's a portrait, one of the most damning portraits of just evil that I could possibly imagine. Like,
by the end, it's very clear that David Chase does not want you to be, holding Tony up as a hero.
It takes so long, and I guess like
he's killed his whole family, sort of, more or less.
Maybe you're concerned for Tony because it's such a good performance, and he's so it's so rich, but like it's just his level of vileness and corruption just knows no limits, really, and like.
I mean, these are spoiler-laden conversations, but after he kills...
Oh, come on. If you haven't seen The Sopranos by now...
The episode where he kills Christopher is like my favorite one.
Then he goes to Vegas and just does mushrooms in the desert and has
like
a great
fucks
time.
Chris's girlfriend and then like, does peyote. And then like stares into the sun and is like, I get it.
And he's like, I won. I'm finally free.
Yeah, and he figures out like how to play roulette, and his gambling streak that's been like, the whole season has been about how his gambling streak has been like on the losing end, and like he turns it around by like staring at the roulette wheel on peyote and says, I understand how the universe works now. And then he, at the same time he figures that out, he says he's dead, and he like gets that he like remembers that he killed Christopher, and he falls down on the casino floor like laughing, and you're just like meant to believe. I mean, I don't know how anyone could still look at this guy as a figure of heroism. He's like the darkest, ugliest thing you could possibly be.
Another really interesting thing in rewatching The Sopranos is how the show portrays the people who aren't in the mafia, like this sort of like upper middle class suburbanite, the doctors, the sort of like Melfi and her
the
sort
guy
of
that he's
academic,
going to buy the house from with the painting.
And what's so fascinating about it is that it's just such a stunning indictment of American culture, in that like we just don't know how to even identify evil. Yeah, that's just right in front of us every day. We have no language or means to confront the Tony Sopranos of the world. And who are able to do what they do because of just kind of the tacit approval of everyone around them, who's just sort of fascinated by him, or just unable to they're just unable to deal with him, or like they're confounded at every level by his corruption and just venality.
Yeah, but also his kind of masculinity
And his violence.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
No, back to the YouTube clip. If you look for it, there's a YouTube clip of like Tony Soprano totally owns liberals, and it's from when he like takes AJ back to Newark, and like he shows him the old neighborhood that's now, of course, all black.
Yes.
And he like just like rolls down the window of his giant SUV to like talk to some guy on the corner.
Right.
And then just like says the vilest stuff about, it's just about how like, black people are lazy and don't work and are dependent and stuff. And like the guys, they think this is like the, Tony Soprano rules. He's putting it out all on the line. This is truth he's spitting right here.
Yeah. And I think that's a speech where he talks about how like when Italians came here, we like improved the neighborhood and all that shit. And it's like all this kind of like, I don't know, ethnic mythology.
Yeah.
This show, The Nostalgia Trap, is just inevitably going to become all about The Sopranos. It just feels that way. It comes up all the time.
Because it is, you like I said, you go back and watch it, and there is nothing that has really captured like the Bush years in this country.
It's an infinite text too. I mean, it just goes so much to talk about.
And again, it only gets more perceptive like with time.
Yeah, it's great. Will, it's so great to talk to you. Thanks so much. I know we didn't touch on your entire personal history, but
that's okay.
But we got a lot accomplished.
We got a lot in.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks, man.